Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today we are going to be talking about life. We're going to be talking about how to deal with life and the challenge of depression. My guest today, Beverly Easler, is a musician and an author of the book, Crossing That Foggy Bridge. Beverly, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. So let's talk a little bit about what was it that led you to write this book? What's a little bit of your story?
Actually, my story started out pretty well. I grew up in a musical family, and so music has been my story pretty much through my life. I've always played the piano and have been very busy doing that for churches and schools and as an accompanist, basically. I don't do solos. And so that's been the thing that's kept me going through life. But I found that when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I started diving down into the darkness of depression. And even though I didn't realize it or recognize it then, and apparently neither did my parents, it became more and more of a drag on my life. And if it hadn't been for my musical skills and opportunities, I'm not sure I would even still be here today, frankly. That was what I lived for. And I grew up in a Christian church. My mom and dad were very active in the church. And that's where I did some of my first playing as a young girl. And that was the one thing that kept me from giving up on life, because that was one thing I knew I could do well. And I got lots of approval and attention from doing that. The rest of my life was difficult because I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't a good person. And I just, one of the things that I learned later was that I've always been an introvert. And when you're 10, you don't understand what that means. And I didn't even understand what that meant until I was 40 or 50. And suddenly I realized, hey, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with being an introvert. It just means you deal with people differently than extroverts do. But all those years that I was an introvert, I thought there was something wrong with me, because I didn't like being around people. Like my friends love to be in groups together and laughing together and go to parties, and I hate parties. and I would rather be alone or with one of my friends, my best friend, or at the piano or sitting and reading a book. I like ideas. I think deeply, and I didn't know how to have just little conversations, the daily.
Did you find that was really a big part of your depression journey? Was
yes.
People were in that age group, right? Everybody's in a group all the time, right. In a group.
Right.
And so
right.
Did you find yourself starting to feel disconnected at that age?
Definitely disconnected. Mm. Yeah. Disconnected, and what's another word I can use? Not welcome. Oh. And it wasn't because my friends weren't welcoming to me. It was because I felt like they wouldn't welcome me. So therefore, I stayed away.
How often do we do that? We get lost in our own emotions and our own experience, and we reflect it out on other people, right?
Exactly. Yeah, like for example, you see a group of people standing together in a huddle talking, and when one of them looks over at you and you think they're talking about you, which, that's not
Probably
true.
they're not.
So it was those kinds of things that, I started to think badly about myself. And as I grew older and as I went through years and years of therapy, I began to understand more of where that was coming from. And that is the primary reason I decided to write this book, because through my therapy, I was learning finally what happened to me as a child that taught me all of these bad lessons about myself. And I thought, these are things that nobody tells you when you're growing up. You don't learn that you have choices. You don't learn that you can set boundaries with people. You don't learn that what you think about makes a big difference in how you feel about yourself. And so that was my primary concern, was getting that message out to people that it's okay to not feel good about yourself, but you can learn to change your whole way of thinking about yourself. And of course, one of the aspects of changing the way you think about yourself is understanding how God thinks about you. And so that has been an important part of my growing especially through the last 25 or 30 years. I've always been a believer. I grew up as a believer. And yet I knew that God was there, but I never really knew how to develop that as a relationship that was meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And so he was always there, but he wasn't really a part of my life because I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't going to him for help. I was trying to go to people for help and not getting it, basically.
Right, exactly. But I think you mentioned that what you think about yourself is so important. And I 150% agree. It's about capturing our thoughts.
Yes.
And thinking good and healthy thoughts. And a lot of the time we listen to our thoughts instead of tell our thoughts what to think. Right?
Right.
So
right.
How did you navigate your thought life? What tools and resources did you use to shift from maybe the self-loathing or the deprecating or the self-inflicting, how bad you are or how unattractive you are and all that? How did you shift that?
Well, the catalyst for that was something my therapist said to me. I was whining to her about some event that happened. I was, an interaction with another person that really upset me. And I was telling her about that, and she said, "So what were you thinking then?" And I looked at her and I said, "What's that got to do with anything?" Well, it has everything to do with it. If you're thinking negatively about an interaction with someone, you're going to react negatively. And I never understood that. And so she started working with me on learning to listen to what I'm thinking before I say something. And she recommended a few different books to me, and I'm sorry I can't give you the names of those right now, but they were excellent in helping me understand how to and the scripture tells us to capture our thoughts and work with them before you say or do anything stupid. And so it took me obviously quite some time, months, maybe years, to develop how to do that in my own thinking. But I discovered that changed so many things in the way I was feeling about myself, and the fact that I have a choice in the way I think. I don't have to think, this is what he thinks of me, or this is what this person expects me to do. I can think, no, that's not true. That's not who I am. That's not my choice. And it was all of those things that really started bringing me into a place where I thought, I'm really a pretty smart person. I have choices and I can do things for myself. I don't have to count on other people to tell me how to feel or to tell me what to do. That changed so much for me.
Yeah, when we're thinking negatively about ourselves, it opens the door for people to plant those kind of untrue ideas about who we are.
Right.
We don't have the confidence, or we don't have the belief in ourselves. That's what I hear you saying is
Right, exactly.
you're vulnerable.
Yes,
You don't know who
very,
you are, and you don't have your own sense of identity.
exactly. And when we start thinking negatively about ourselves, we start thinking negatively about the people we're interacting with. Unfortunately, part of that was between me and my parents. There was an incident that happened when I was 10 years old that I believe changed everything in my life and sent me down that dark road. My grandfather had been very ill. He had a major stroke, and so he was bedridden literally for a year and a half. And my grandmother was taking care of him at home. You know, they didn't have the money for hospital for a year and a half, and so she took care of him at home. And he was my favorite grandfather. I loved him dearly. And when I was 10 years old, we went down to their home for Christmas. And he was, you know, very laid up, crippled, totally couldn't do anything for himself. And my grandmother took him, she got him out of the bed and put him in a wheelchair to wheel him out to the dining room to feed him. And here I am, a little 10-year-old girl with my cousins and my uncles and aunts. And here my grandfather, who I dearly love, is being wheeled out, and he looked terrible and he didn't smell good. And he was pale and his hair was all messed up. He just didn't look like my grandpa. And I was just staring at him because I didn't know how to think or feel or anything. And he turned his head and he looked right at me and he started to cry. And from that moment, I was devastated. I thought it was my fault. I thought I was staring at him and probably looking, you know, who knows what, fearful or whatever. And so I believed from that moment that it was my fault that he started to cry. I did something to hurt him. And that was the last time I saw him before he died. And so because of what was happening in my family during those next couple of years, my mom had 3 more younger kids to take care of. Me and my older brother were able to, you know, take care of ourselves. We were 11 and 12 by then. And so I didn't feel like I was getting any attention at home. And I thought, it's my fault. It was my fault my grandpa went away. And they never talked about him after that day, as far as I know, don't remember. And so I built that belief. It was my fault that grandpa went away and I'm no good and they don't love me anymore.
Isn't it
And so
amazing,
that's
children, we take these life experiences, and because
yes,
we don't have the ability to understand emotions and situations,
yes,
such a limited perspective, and it really does
yes.
affect your life.
Oh, absolutely. And I didn't understand any of that for decades. And that's that, you know, obviously I didn't think about that all the time. It just got buried in my psyche or my whatever.
Yep.
And
Your
but
emotional brain just stored that away as a
yes,
truth. Yep.
yes. And it affected everything about what I believe about myself. Everything's my fault. I'm no good. Nobody loves me. All of those messages kept going through my head, no matter what the situation was. So that's where I lived for about 40 years, was in that dark place of I'm not good enough. Nobody loves me.
What turned the
And
corner for you?
well, what turned the corner was I started going to therapy. And for the first several years of therapy, I wasn't getting much out of it. They weren't telling me anything that helped. And then I found this Christian therapist, and she's the one who began to teach me about how we think, what happens when we're children that causes us to think this way. We learn from our parents, we learn from our teachers, we learn from our government, we learn all of these things about who we are and who we're supposed to be through other people, and we take that as fact and as truth. Mm-hmm. And we build our life's abilities and thinking on those things. Whether they're true or not, we don't know that when we're 10. Right. We just think that's the way it is, so that's what I have to be. And it wasn't until much late, when I finally found this Christian therapist, she started to teach me about those things, about you have choices. You don't have to do that. Oh, really? I thought I had to do everything that everybody tells me to do. So she started me on that track of learning how to do life as an individual person who has value. And because of her Christian beliefs, which matched mine, we talked about that too, and how important that is to our well-being and our thoughts and how we look at ourselves. So it was a long 40 years when I was just struggling to just be. I didn't like myself. I didn't think I had lots of friends. Now that I look back, I can say I always had friends, and I don't understand that because I was in a very cloudy, dark place, and I don't understand how people could have stood being around me. But I did have friends, and I believe that was God-given. He brought people into my life for the times I needed them, and I'm grateful for that now. I see it very clearly now.
It's interesting because I think that's one of the side effects of something like depression. When our thoughts are unchecked, when our emotions are unchecked, and we just allow them to be what they are and assume that everything we think and feel is right and true, which unfortunately it's not.
Right.
We can't assess anything properly.
No.
You just don't, your measure is off.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably felt worse than you were on the outside because our thought life, it's all in your head, and it's awful up there.
Yes.
But other people, we don't generally show all of that on the outside.
No, and I enjoyed my friends. I enjoyed my music. I looked happy on the outside much of the time. But inside, I was just dying and crying. And I didn't know what I was doing on the outside. I knew I was trying to be a good person. I was trying to be a friend to people. And I apparently succeeded in much of that. But I never felt like I was a good person. Never felt like I understood anything about life. I always felt naive and irresponsible and incompetent on the inside, which as I look back now, I think that wasn't true. But you don't get that when you're between the ages of 6 and 16 or even 26. You just don't get that.
What did you learn about boundaries? You mentioned that you had to learn about boundaries. What boundaries did you struggle to set, and then how did you learn to set them?
Well, because I was a musician, I played the piano a lot for many different groups, church choirs and school choirs and soloists, and that was who I was, and that was how I got my good feelings about myself, was doing that one thing that was a blessing to me. And I got to the point where I was so busy playing for so many different people and groups. My schedule was full. I was working full time at just, one of your regular office jobs. And in my spare time, evenings and weekends, I was involved in all of these musical activities. And it got to the point where I was just so busy and so tired. I thought, I can't do this anymore. But I felt like I had to keep doing it so that I wouldn't disappoint people, or to make sure that their needs in music were covered and they were depending on me. And so I couldn't let them down. That's what I was thinking. And then one day somebody said, why don't you just say no?
Oh, novel idea.
I said, what? I can't do that. They depend on me. And it was from that on, and later discussions about saying no and why that's possible and even important. I started just one day. It was some inane thing. I was talking to a friend, and I don't know, she was asking me to go with her on a picnic or something, and I really didn't want to go. And I thought, okay, Bev, this is your chance. And I said, no, I don't think I will. And I didn't do it in a very, calm or, I don't know, kind way. I just said, no. And boy, that felt good. She didn't understand. I didn't try to explain to her, I don't want to be with you. But it felt really good. And I thought, well, that wasn't so hard. This 2-letter word, all you have to do is say no. If you have an explanation that sounds reasonable, go ahead and say if they need to know. And so for the first time, when someone that I had been playing for, he was directing a small group of musicians, and I played for him for 3 years and enjoyed it to a point, but then there got to a point where I just wasn't liking it anymore. I didn't like the music I was having to play. It was more classical, and that's really not my thing. And I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And so the following summer, when he asked if I'd be willing to play for the following year, I looked at him and I said, I really think I need to stop now. I need to drop out. I can't do this anymore. And he was disappointed, and he tried to convince me otherwise. But I said, no, I just don't feel like I just can do this. I don't even want to do this. I have other piano responsibilities that I'm involved in, and that's enough. I can't do this anymore for you. I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry. I've enjoyed it, but enough. And he was okay with that. He said, okay, I'll find somebody else. Oh, well, that hurt my feelings. Oh, you have somebody else you can turn to. It didn't really hurt my feelings. But that was probably the first time I said no to something that really mattered to me. Playing the piano that's my identity. That's who I am. I didn't get past that point for another several years. But to say no to who I am was hard on him, but it was even harder on me. But it was an important milestone for me. I can say no, and it's okay. So I just went from there, starting to say no to things that I really didn't want to do or didn't want to be responsible for.
And how did that impact your life on the whole? How did you find that setting boundaries helped you with your emotions, your thoughts? Like, how did all of that tie in together?
It was like the whole world was lifted off my shoulders. Just felt like I had lost an entire ball of junk off my shoulders. I don't have to do what other people tell me to do or want me to do, expect me to do. I can be my own person. There are times when I have to decide whether what's the most important to me in this relationship. Is it the relationship that's important to me? Is it what I'm doing that's important to me? Or is it something else that I don't even get right now? Mm. And so once I was able to start making those decisions and those choices, it made saying no even easier because, well, number one, does this relationship mean something to me? No. I'm just playing as an accompanist for this director. Having a relationship with him or this group doesn't have any meaning for me. It's the playing the piano that has the meaning to me. So are you willing to say no to that? And when I realized, yeah, I can say no to that, but over here I'm playing in this capacity and I don't want to say no to that. So there I was making choices and setting a boundary between this opportunity and this opportunity. And it just made a world of difference in how I was feeling about myself. I can set boundaries and people aren't going to kill me. They're not going to run over me or tell me you're a bad person. Okay, that's fine.
When you're afraid to set boundaries, you really do think
yes,
something horrible is going to happen if you actually put your foot down, so to speak.
Yes.
Did anything horrible ever happen?
No, never.
That.
Yeah. And so that, like just lifted the load off my shoulders. I don't have to say yes all the time. I can choose what I want to do. I still was a people pleaser. I don't want people to get upset with me. I don't want people to be mad at me. And so it took me a long time to stop doing that and to stop trying to please people all the time. Sometimes that's important to me to please the person I'm, talking with because they're a friend or a relative, or I don't want to get into, deep doo-doo with them. Or the relationship means something to me and I don't want to lose that. Mm-hmm. But pleasing people and saving relationships are very two different things. And it took me a while to learn that.
So you said pleasing people and saving relationships are two different things. Why don't you tell me what you mean by that?
Well, I think for me, pleasing people was doing what was on their agenda for me. I want you to play for this event. I want you to be at this rehearsal. I want you to facilitate this women's Bible study. I want you to take me to the grocery store. Just anything. And I would do those things. Not because the relationship was important to me, but because I wanted to please them and I didn't even know why I wanted to please this particular person. On the other hand, if it's a relationship that's meaningful to me, a good friend or a sibling or a cousin who I dearly love, then that's very different because the relationship becomes more important than my agenda or their agenda. What am I trying to say? I'm more interested in continuing a good relationship than doing or not doing something they would like.
So it sounds like, when you're people pleasing, you're worried about what the other person thinks. So you're doing something you may or may not enjoy just for the potential of displeasing someone that really isn't as important to you.
Exactly.
It's understanding the importance of the relationship, whereas the other, saving the relationships, is recognizing, not in a harsh way, but who is meaningful and who is not. Because every relationship we have doesn't have the same level of weight in our lives. There's some people, it's like if they come and go, you might be sad about it, but it's okay to let them go. And there's others where, no, I need to preserve this. And that's what I hear you saying.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I have learned, and I still do to some extent, try to please people. but not as much as before. I've got different values now, different boundaries, and so pleasing people isn't important to me anymore. It's doing what I believe is the right thing for me and possibly for them.
Now, understanding that you have choices.
Yes.
And that you can set boundaries. How did that impact the depression you were struggling with?
I think it kind of goes along with the boundaries. Once I realized that I didn't always have to say, I didn't have to be a yes girl. I didn't have to always say, yes, I will do that, or yes, I am what you say I am, or any of that. It just opened up new avenues for me to think about who I really am inside, not what other people see, who I am inside and who I want to be. I was always being what other people wanted me to be. And I decided finally that I want to be who I am. I want to find out who I am and then be that person. And that was hard for me, but it wasn't any harder than setting those boundaries. I learned how to make choices first for myself, and then I learned to set those boundaries with other people. It was making the individual choice. We all make choices every day. What time am I going to get up in the morning? Where am I going to go for lunch? And, just all those choices we make daily. When I learned that I could make different choices, even in those simple things, just to bring some variety to my day or whatever, that was a life changer for me. I thought everything was a routine, everything was a habit. You have to do everything the same way. And no, you don't. You can do it whatever way you want. I can sit here and blow my nose while I'm talking to you, or I can be, straight and, I just can be who I am. What a concept. What a nice idea. Just be who you are.
And this journey for you, how old were you when you started this journey of going to therapy and trying to figure all this out?
Well, I think I probably started in therapy when I was maybe in my early 30s, maybe a little earlier than that. And I didn't really even know why I was there. I just knew I needed help. And part of the thing with therapy for me was I had learned over the years I didn't even know what I needed, but I learned over the years to get what I need emotionally. I just needed to be in contact with one other person on a one-to-one conversation with a person that I trusted, a person I thought could help me, a person that I thought cared about me. And so therapy became like an addiction to me. I was addicted to it because it made me feel good. It wasn't about learning what's wrong with me or learning how to do things different. It was about getting that emotional comfort and support that I thought I was missing. Well, I was missing. And so that became a way of life for me, being in therapy. I went through, I don't know how many different therapists over the years. And there were periods of time when I didn't, I wasn't in any therapy, but I was manipulating other people in my life to get me those kinds of support and affirmation and applause and all of those things that I needed emotionally to stay a relatively healthy person. That's where my piano playing came in. I got all kinds of applause and all kinds of accolades and, oh, you play so well. And that was meaningful to me. I needed to hear that I can do something well. And so being in therapy was important to me more on that level. It was only when I started in with this Christian therapist that I really started to realize there's something in my head that's wrong. It's not something about me. that's wrong. It's something in my thinking that's wrong. And that's where I really started to learn all of these lessons about what do you need? What choices do you need to make? How do you think? What are you thinking about? What are you afraid of? This therapist started asking me these different questions. And I was starting to write those down to ask myself, what are you afraid of? And when you're finally able to answer those questions honestly to yourself, then you start to realize, oh, I can change this. And that's what the book is all about. It's about learning how to ask yourself those better questions. Do I have a choice? Is it a good choice? Is it a bad choice? Do you have a choice? Yes, you have a choice. It can be a good one or a bad one, but you can still make a choice. What do you need? What is it that you're craving? For me, it was hugs and kudos and willingness to be with me. And then asking, what am I thinking? That was the most important one, obviously, because that's where all of our needs and beliefs and everything comes from. It's the way we think, what we're thinking about. And so that was a key. Probably the other thing was, well, I mentioned, what are you afraid of? Like in my interaction with people, why don't you open your mouth and say something? What are you afraid of? And when I started answering that question, I thought, well, that's stupid. You don't need to be afraid of that. Just be who you are, say what you think, say what you believe. And if they want to argue with you, well, we'll see about that. I can make a choice there. Yeah, so all of those questions I started asking myself were what changed my life, really, and made me realize, hey, I'm as good a person as you are. I'm as smart as you are. I can think clearly if I allow myself to. I can do things. If I can't do certain things, I still have that issue. I feel like I don't know how to do this, and I'm scared to try, and I'm afraid to tell people I don't know how to do this. But so that's one thing I'm working on, is thinking through that. Yes, you can do this. You're smart. Read some instructions about how to do this. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm just learning how to ask myself, what are you afraid of? How can you make this happen? What do you have to do to make this work? Figure it out. You're smart. Do it. And if you need help, ask somebody. So, just learning all those new questions just took away but most of my fear and shame about who I am. And of course, the presence of the Lord made a whole difference to me. I think the one thing, even though I was still feeling depressed, and part of my depression was because of the biochemical stuff going on in my body that I wasn't familiar with. And so I've been on drugs, for that most of my life, but it didn't change all of the things. But now that I've started asking better questions of myself, I don't have that feeling that there's something wrong with me. And so when I do experience some depression, I go through episodes of depression, maybe, 3 or 4 times a year, but I recognize it, and I'm able to just say, okay, that's your body acting up, just pay attention to what you're thinking and deal with that one day at a time. So once I was able to recognize this is depression and there's nothing you can do about it besides take care of your body, take care of yourself, let yourself rest, just be kind to yourself. Don't get involved in any social activity that you don't want to, because that'll make it worse. I was able to recognize that depression, and so now I can live through that without getting all out of whack, So learning to ask those questions was important, but there was one other thing. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I heard a Christian comedian, maybe you've heard of her, Shonda Pierce.
Love her.
She was on an interview on the radio with, and I can't remember who she was interviewing with, but she made one comment that just lit things up for me. She was talking about how people can make you feel bad or not good enough. And she said, I've realized I'm a child of the King. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, why didn't I think of that? And I started saying that to myself. I'm a child of the King. I'm a daughter of the King. And he loves me. And he's with me every day. And I knew that, even though I hadn't really experienced that on a deep personal level. Suddenly, I'm a daughter of the King. And my life turned around, literally. And I had several people, friends, different people at church say, Bev, what happened to you? You've changed. Your face is just lit up. What's different? And I said, I believe I'm a daughter of the King, and that's all that I need to know. And so that is filtered through my entire book, the importance of realizing that we have a God who loves us and who is there to take care of us and guide us and direct us and teach us. He brings people into our lives who are there to teach us the things about life that we don't know. It gives me goosebumps to realize that, gosh, I wish I'd known that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that he is there personally, living inside me, directing me, teaching me, loving me. And I thought, I need people to know this. Not only that they're a good person, they can do life if they learn how to do life. Learning how to do life can be very difficult because you're dealing with people. You're dealing with relationships. It's not, boy, do you remember that old comic character, Ziggy? One of his favorite sayings was, I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. And that's sort of been my motto through the years. I can't stand people because they're so hard to deal with. Mm-hmm. If you don't get the relationship, how to talk to people, how to be with people, that's what makes life hard. Because that's what we do all day long. We're dealing with relationships. And that's where the relationship with God comes in. That's the most important one. Because he can show you how to look at this other person. Don't look at them with anger. Look at them with love and kindness and even pity sometimes. Don't look at them as a terrible person. Look at them the way you look at yourself, the way I look at you. Look at them with love and understanding, and be gentle and kind to them. So he's everything.
There's a real sense of identity that you were missing.
Yes.
We're seeking that identity when we're people pleasing. Our identity is locked into their approval or disapproval, which we cannot control. It's impossible to control. So what I hear you saying is your relationship with Christ and God gives you that sense of unshakable identity. This
absolutely
is who I am.
Yes. My identity was with the piano. I wrapped the piano around me like a hiding place. That was who I am. I'm a piano player. And I hid behind that for decades. That was my identity. And then it was like 7 years ago, the Lord came to me and he said, Bev, do you love me? And I said, well, yes, I do. Bev, do you really love me? And that kind of set me back. I thought, well, yeah, I do. Bev, do you love me more than you love your music? Whoa.
That's a big question.
That was a huge question. It sort of made me step back emotionally and go, oh my goodness. And it didn't take me long, but I finally said, yes, I do. But why are you asking me this? He asked me to walk away from playing the piano. He said, I want you to walk away from all of this and follow me. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so I did. I walked away from playing the piano for church. I still play the piano at home for myself. I have a piano right behind me here. But I walked away and I thought, what's this going to be like? But it's been wonderful. I haven't missed playing the piano publicly. I haven't missed it at all. I've enjoyed being able to worship in church instead of being busy, worrying about what comes next, what's the next song we're doing, and where do I have to be, and all of that went away. And he started working with me on all of these things I've learned over the last number of years. And I said, he said, you need to tell people about what you've learned, and you need to tell people about me and where I've helped you. And so that's where the book started. Walk away from the music and get busy on this book. So it's just been an amazing journey. And I'm delighted that I don't deal with depression every single day of my life. Because now I like who I am. Because I know God loves who I am. And he's making me better every day.
So how long have you been working on that book? How long did it take you to write it from the time you got away from music?
I started on it, technically, I started working on the book, not as a book, 25 years ago as I was going through therapy. Because I was taking notes, I was reading books and copying things and stacking up paper full of information. And so I was learning through reading and listening to other people and taking notes. And so I had reams of, information, resources in my folders. But it was about 3 years ago, I think, when I started thinking, I need to put this information in some kind of form that other people can make use of. And that's when I started thinking maybe a workbook that churches could use, or I don't know. I didn't really know where I was headed. And then one day I asked the Lord, what do you want me to do with this stuff? And he said, put it in a book. You're an author. You like to write. Put it in a book. And so I started, it was probably, this is 2019, it was probably the middle of 2017 when I started going back through all of those reams of papers and ideas and thoughts and notes that I had taken all of those years, and sorting through those and kind of lining them up with those different questions that I had kind of categorized that as being important. And so I threw out a lot of things. I kept other things and put them in a pile that fit a particular question. So I was a little bit more organized. And so once I got that organization process done, then I started the writing process. And that started probably in January of 2018. And I finally finished the last page in May of this year. So, and then the book was published in June of this year. So it took me a year and a half to actually write the book. I love writing poetry, so I used some of the poetry I'd already written as my therapy. It was my journaling in poetry, and so I used some of those for the book, and I wrote 4 or 5 new poems just to fit the book. So a year and a half. It was a year and a half of almost 24/7 working on it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd hear the Spirit saying to me, I think it would be a good idea if you would say this. So I'd get up and write it down, and it was it was a fun, hard, difficult, agonizing, therapeutic process. So I got a lot out of doing it, and I'm glad it's done, because now I can look back on those things that I hadn't even remembered. He brought memories to my mind that I hadn't thought of in years. And so I had to work my way through those and write about those and cry some tears over those. And so it was really, wow, this can really help somebody. This can really speak to somebody about this particular part of your journey, or this particular lesson that you learned about life. So I felt really good when I finished the book. I thought, this is what I needed to do. I feel like I've used my depression and all of life that I've learned to be of help to other people who struggle with the same issues, choices, boundaries, thinking, feeling, shame, fear, all of those things. It's all in the book. It's sort of like a guide using questions. Each chapter is a new question. So I hope people will find it to be not only helpful, but draw them to the love of the Lord, because that's the only thing that really got me through all of this.
How old were you when you started and when you finished the book?
When I 25 years ago, when I started working on, putting together all those things, I would have been 45. And now I'm 70. So good chunk of my life has been devoted to learning all of those lessons and putting it in writing.
I just really wanted to point that out, because Feminine Roadmap is about navigating the challenges and the changes of midlife and beyond. And so
yes.
You really started this journey
yes.
in midlife.
Yes.
And have continued to have, I would say, the greater growth, the greater
yes.
version of yourself after what most people want to call the prime of your life. I would
yes.
say the productivity and the fullness of who you are has actually come into play from midlife on.
Really, in the last 10 years, between the ages of 60 and 70, I've seen the most growth in the way I think, the way I feel, the way I interact with people. It's a long process. Life is hard. And if you don't start out with life lessons, which most of us don't, it's a struggle. You learn by doing, and we don't always do it very well.
Unfortunately, yes. So let me ask you this. If we were to kind of distill down your life lessons, if you could give the gift of 3 things you really want people to know and understand today, something to give them something to chew on, maybe go and journal about, what would those 3 things be, Beverly?
Those 3 things would probably be learning how to make better choices. Start asking yourself about the choices you're making in the way you are interacting with your children, your husband, the way you interact with people in the workplace. How do you make choices about what to do when you're feeling bad? Just choices in every aspect of life is important. The second thing is learning how to set boundaries. That is so important, because we kind of let the world run over us and direct our steps and direct our thinking and direct our language and our behavior. We need to learn to choose and make better choices about how we're going to behave. If we're going to behave like the world does and think like the world does, or if we're going to set boundaries that don't allow us to do that. And one of the important things is to learn what God's boundaries are. He does have boundaries in our behavior if we want to follow him. So that's important. Another thing that, well, probably the most important thing is start paying attention to what you're thinking, how you think, what you're thinking about. Because if you don't think about what you think about, your mouth is just going to go all kinds of places that you don't want it to go. And you're going to get into situations you don't want to get into. And so thinking is the key. Thinking is the key when you're trying to make choices. Thinking is the key when you're trying to set boundaries. Thinking is the key when you're trying to understand, quote, what's wrong with you. You need to think clearly, and you need to think through God's eyes.
I would say one of the questions that I use with my coaching clients, it's a very simple question, and it's hard at first, is it true? Like,
yes.
Really true. Not as someone
Exactly.
else telling you it's true.
Yes.
But is
yes.
that thing you're thinking actually true?
Yes. I have a section in one chapter of my book about what we believe. And much of what we believe is what we learned when we were 10 years old, 6 years old. And now when we're adults, we need to look back and start asking ourselves that question. Is that really true? Can that be changed? And once we get through that, suddenly life becomes an open book for us.
Yes. And freedom.
Freedom. Yes. Yes. I feel like I can breathe now.
Isn't it amazing? I think a lot of people, Beverly, could utilize your book even if they're not struggling with depression, because
absolutely,
it's a freedom from the bondage of whatever fogs your mind in your life.
Yes. And that was the whole idea behind the book, is people need to just ask themselves better questions. It has nothing to do with depression. It has nothing to do with whether you're a believer in God. It's about learning how to do life. And you can do that by asking better questions.
And you learned, like I said, later in life. So there's always hope for a better way of doing life.
Absolutely, there's hope. Don't ever, I say early in the book, whatever happens, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Because things will change. Things will always change.
Yes. This too shall pass. You remember that?
I do. My therapist used to say that to me all the time.
And it's true. So,
it
Beverly,
is true.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, your mission, your wisdom that you've gained over the years with my audience today. Thank you for saying yes and sharing that with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed the chat.
Yes, absolutely. So today, friends, I've been speaking with Beverly Easler. She is a musician and an author of the book, Crossing That Foggy Bridge, which you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Christian book distributors. But if you happen to be driving and you don't have the ability to write this down, just go to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 136. Down in the show notes, you will find links that will take you directly to Beverly's book. And think about, my friends, subscribe while you're at my website. Put your name and email in there. I have a gift for you. And think about how you can include these kinds of conversations in your life to help them be tools to help you navigate the challenges and the changes that you're going through. And a book like this might be an excellent opportunity for you to grab a few copies and grab a few friends and sit down and have these conversations. Give people a safe place. Hold a space for those that you love. You know, let's live with more grace, more forgiveness with ourselves and with others. So I want to thank you again, friends, for listening in today, for being a part of my tribe, for giving Beverly your time and your attention. And I look forward to sharing more life-giving conversations with you again next week. Until then, my friends, take care, forgive, live with grace, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.